Good morning, everybody. John Spiepla here from GAI Insights, doing the Gen AI news briefing, rating your top news essential, important, or optional. I have an interesting set of things today. We've got everything goes, does your LLM have values, to a fantastic new acquisition by OpenAI for $3 billion for a AI coding company. We have Ankash Honda, Luda Kopakina, Tim Andrews, and the return of the great Adam Rappaport. All right, Ankash. First article, thank you. So let's see who we have on this one. We've got, go ahead, Ankash.
Yeah.
Sorry?
So the first one that we have comes from Forbes, and it's talk about how it's time to get concerned as major companies are replacing workers with AI.
Yeah, here we go. We have AI labor replacement with capital. Old time story. Tim, what do you think?
I think this is interesting, but optional. It's a brief piece. If you don't know this by now, I don't know where you've been. Even for AI leaders unlike us, who are not in it every day and every minute, this has been a discussion. I mean, I guess you could say it's important. It's a quick read, and there's a few examples of large companies doing things. So maybe I could be talking to important because, everybody likes to say, oh, it's not going to impact jobs and yada, yada, yada. But here we are impacting jobs. But it's very high level. It's not, a study of any type. It's tiny amounts. And it's not even clear that the layoffs they cited are really connected to AI. So there's a lot of holes in the data here. You're on mute, John.
Thank you. I said, all right, pretty comprehensive damning of this article. What do you think here, Adam?
Yeah, I put it in the important category. I think it's from Forbes, which is a big name. It's got a lot of major labels in it, a lot of logos that people are going to recognize. If anyone is looking for fuel for the fire, trying to justify spend, trying to justify the importance of this, anyone who's a laggard and they need some way, maybe, Tim, you would classify this as a lower back pocket important article. It does have some good numbers in it, broken down by the different companies that it's talking about. Not a lot that's super insightful or earth-shattering for those of us that are across it, but I think this certainly could be a valuable piece for anyone that's trying to justify or continue to make the case for why this stuff really is important. It's not going away, and that we need to be paying attention.
Right. Paul, where are you on this?
I agree with Tim.
Luda? All right.
Yeah,
we're on the high hour order here.
It is important. It cites a number of 5 examples. I agree with Tim that it's not clear that those layoffs are really connected to AI, but I think the enterprise leaders, are aware of it. But in general, you have to position and prepare, be proactive about this happening if you are employing AI in a big way. So I think important.
All right, important it is. Ankash, next.
Okay, the next one that we have is a research paper which talks about large language models, small labor market effect.
Yes, here we have a couple of academics, one from Chicago, one from the Netherlands, around writing out of the Friedman Institute, a rather conservative crew of libertarians or free marketers. What do you think here? Adam?
That's me, John. Yeah, thanks. I don't know. I struggled a bit with this article. It seems in many ways to be making arguments that completely contradict what we were just announcing in that Forbes article. And for me, it seems it just doesn't make sense. I looked at their math. I'm hoping Tim can add some insight to me, because I know he's really good at looking at the rigor behind research and where people are coming from. I did chat a little bit with the AI. Basically what they're saying is that it's showing a fairly insignificant dent in the impact it has. It looked at 11 occupations. It was 25,000 workers in 7,000 workplaces, but it was specifically across Denmark. The net was really that these don't have a big market effect, and that's what their survey seems to show. seems counterintuitive to me. It doesn't line up with what I'm experiencing personally or anecdotally in the field. So I kind of pulled the AI and tried to get some arguments around what the flaws in their assumptions might be, and didn't really honestly come up with much. So I was left kind of wavering a little bit on really the significance or importance of this. Generally, I felt it was optional, but it might just be that I couldn't quite pull enough away from it to make it significant.
Yeah, they make an assertion early in the paper that Denmark has a pretty liquid labor market. I would contest that. You have to. It's pretty hard to fire somebody in Denmark. You have to have cause. You have to give them, if they've been employed with you for 9 years, you have to give them like a year's notice. 0 to 6 months, you have to give them a month's notice. That's my biggest problem with it. Is that this is all Denmark. That's a very different labor market than I believe than they're asserting. But anyway.
And in addition, John, it's dated. It's dated. It's 24.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's super optional, triple optional in the lingo of Paul.
Right, but some fall into their mentality at the it's like you want labor choice, blah blah blah. We don't have to worry about AI doing anything big to the economy because, God forbid, the government get involved. Anyway, all that stuff. Paul.
Adam, I'm so excited that you're back, and now we're pounding the living crap out of optional articles. There were a few times when you were gone where we were actually as an essential article, but then we caught ourselves. And
are you saying you have me to thank for our pounding the crap out of the optional ones, Paul?
Exactly, yes.
Adam, focus. King of the trivial. No, only kidding.
I agree. I mean, I agree, John, with your fundamental point, which is labor may be mobile on the labor side. That is, it's easy for labor to move, but to your point, it's not so easy for firms to move labor in or out that easily. So I think that's also it's survey based. There's a million things here you could argue with. And also, by the way, who would expect a huge impact in 2024 by the end of 2024? I mean, you can see it in pockets here and there, but you're not going to see it in a broad level survey yet. It's going to take some time for it to show up. This is, they quote, Solo's famous comment about the computer revolution. The other thing that I always hated about that quote, which was that, computers show up everywhere except in the productivity statistics, is that it just was never true. It was only true if you took a very narrow focus. This is like saying cars had no impact because they weren't very much used in the early days of automotives and they weren't going to transform anything. So it's the transformation that makes the big difference in economics at the end of the day, not the initial substitution of labor. That has some impact. But even for that, it's really early to have large-scale impact and try and measure it.
Yep.
Yeah, look, the productivity statistics do not capture consumer surplus. Okay, so if
right, that's the other thing.
Yeah, you think about Gmail. Okay, Gmail's free, and it decreases GDP. Does that mean that there wasn't an innovation? It didn't have an effect on productivity? You
could argue it's decreased. I could make the argument it's decreased productivity, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But you're right. The point is, it doesn't even get measured, right? It certainly has created entirely new industries. I mean, e-commerce wouldn't exist without the internet, and yet the internet itself, if you try and measure, it's pretty hard to measure.
Yes, what I'm saying is that where the Gmail substitution for when the cars substituted for horses, that showed up in GDP because you sold cars. When Gmail substitutes for the post office or for UPS, it does not show up in GDP. Where it shows up is in the stock price of Google, and so it shows up on the balance sheet, not the income statement. So this is so.
And it shows up, I think, in the ability of smaller entities to make larger businesses. So there is leverage. I think there's real productivity. It's just we don't measure it that way. Same thing with tariffs, we don't even take into account services exports and imports and all these tariff calculations, which is another big problem.
All I can say is thank God we're going to tax movies. Okay.
We've certainly beaten it up for.
Yeah, all right. Optional. We're out of here.
But we enjoyed it.
We enjoyed it, exactly.
Yep. The next one that we have comes from McKinsey, and it talks about open source technology in the age of AI.
All right. In the great spirit of McKinsey, running in front of the parade already happening here. What do you see, Luda?
Yeah, it's a very, I wouldn't even say interesting article. It's a result of the survey that McKinsey conducted with Mozilla Foundation and Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And the message is people are using open source software and models. And that's, I think, what one would expect. The one tidbit here is it's over 50%, and it's more pronounced in technology firms. Again, so it's good that they confirmed it, but I don't know. I was vacillating. It's for me, it's optional. There's nothing new here per se.
Okay, we got an optional happening here. Adam, where are you on this?
I was on the fence as well. I'll make the case for important, and we'll see if it sticks. And that was just that there are probably a lot of organizations that are experiencing pressure to stick with the big names and with the enterprise leaders, or have concerns about the risks associated with open source. And to see that it is something that's happening, I think there's tremendous value in it, especially as cost pressures start to come into play. And vendor lock comes into play, that to have something like this available and to be able to point to it and say, look, there is widespread open source adoption happening, and it is an important part of our AI strategy that we have to be taking into consideration, might be enough to tip it over into the important camp.
All right.
That's a very good point, Adam. Yeah, I from that perspective, I think it's worthwhile going important.
All right, Tim, sitting on the fence. Which way is Humpty going?
Yeah, I think you should give it an important. I don't like the quality of the writing of the article, and I do think it's a little late to the party. But it's a quick read, and it's a good reminder for AI leaders that this open source stuff. And again, they don't even do a good job of saying what open source is. But all that said, I still think it's worth giving it important.
Paul?
I hold my nose a little bit over the quality of the article.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, I think this interesting tech wave is that you do have open source models for most of the hyperscalers, or if not all of them here. So those options there. Llama 3 from Meta continue to be a very solid model. And we've talked a lot about not having vendor lock-in on your intelligence source of supply. So I think it's a pragmatic reminder, but definitely lower importance.
Okay.
Lower important, yeah.
Just barely chinning the bar on the big I. Important it is. Next, Ankaj.
Next one that we have for today comes from Wall Street Journal, and it talks about how United Health now has 1,000 AI use cases, including in claims.
All right, Tim, we've got a big name here, United Health. I think the biggest healthcare insurer in the country. And coming out of the Wall Street Journal, real case study. What do you think?
Yes, it's the largest by a mile, in fact. I think this is important. It's a big company. It's in every major index. It's a large company, not just in healthcare, but in the United States in general. And they're putting their marker down, saying we're using this everywhere. So it's lightweight in terms of. I wouldn't go here for real case study. It's very light on the details, but the fact that it's saying that a Fortune 100, I think probably even a Fortune 10 maybe, company is putting this everywhere, including all their core processes. That's a pretty important article you should be aware of.
And the thing of Optum behind the picture here. Those of you who don't know, Optum is the data part of United Health, and they have been responsible for the vast majority of their United Health's earnings for some time, like well over 60%.
Yeah, and they're a $30 billion entity in their own right. It's a very large company, just Optum.
So we're headed for important here. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I was optional in the pregame for the reason Tim stated, which is not that you wouldn't want to come to this for the use cases. They talk about how much they're using it, but they don't really say how. And so I was considering optional, but I think Tim makes a really good point, and I think I've been swayed into the important camp. It's in the Wall Street Journal, and it is, as you said, potentially a Fortune 10. It's a massive company. and this is tremendous adoption. So that's worth taking note of.
All right, actions of Fortune 3, Luda.
Wow.
Yeah, I was optional, but hearing Tim, the fact that it's a huge company and they're using it in 1,000 ways, but they don't talk about the impact. It's a very light article.
Yeah.
It's just, so that's why I was optional. I can be swayed into importance, but I'm actually still optional.
Yeah, but the point here, I think that is really important for people to be aware of. I almost rated this essential. It's Fortune 8. I just looked it up, so it is in the Fortune 10. This is one of the largest companies in the world, and they are committed publicly across the organization. So yes, results count. It would be a lot better if they had results, but it's early days. The fact that if this was name any other large scale company, Apple or anything else, making this kind of commitment across the board in a major mainstream news outlet, it's big news.
No, I hear you. That's why I said I'm okay with important.
Tim, you and I will have to put things later. According to the thing I'm looking at, it's Fortune 4. Walmart, Amazon, Apple, United Health Group, Berkshire Hathaway.
Okay, I don't know. I did not vet my sources very well, but it came up Fortune 8 for me. But it's in the Fortune 10. It's big company.
Big, huge company. All right, important it is.
John, before we I just want to note a few things, though. I think this is a really good example of a company that's in the WINS framework in the Crucible. So they use a high amount of words, images, numbers, and sounds, different than Apple, which is much more manufacturing centric here. So we're seeing transformation of, a company that does. I think the other important point thing is that, just recall this is the CEO who got shot. So even though there's 4 billion claims, same 90% of the claims are adjudicated by AI is probably not going well with some of the consumers out there. So doing that trade-off, but it's a massive company in a regulated industry that's in the Crucible.
Yeah.
And we should point out, they did say in the article, I mean, again, healthcare in general and payers in particular have been using machine learning for probably 15 years, okay, to do all sorts of stuff, trending analysis, all sorts of stuff. That's not generative AI, but still that says half of it is generative AI, which is still massive.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Important it is. Akash, next.
The next one that we have comes from HBR and talks about, do LLMs have values?
Here we go. Folks who are out looking at the ethics of AI, feeding, I think it's 9 different models into their profile of what are your values. So what do you think here, Adam?
I thought this was certainly interesting, and I actually considered it important to bear in mind. Not all large language models, it seems, are created equal when it comes to their alignment, which I think we knew, but to get some numbers around it and to use what I think it's called the portrait values, I got it up here again, the portrait values questionnaire, which is, I guess, a standard one that's used. It's almost an industry best practice in terms of measuring human values. They use those for the large language models as well. And as you see there at the bottom of the article, it does break it down by model. GPT-4.5 is strong in benevolence. Claude is strong in humility. Mistral is strong in rule conformity. And to even just have the awareness of this and to take into consideration how that alignment might influence the answers you get and have it factor into your model choice, given where you're using models in your pipelines, is a worthwhile thing to explore.
All right, looking at important here. Paul, what do you think?
Important for all the reasons that Adam said. In addition to, we saw last week that OpenAI had to roll back one because it was too flattering. And so the idea that these are personalities, these are not mechanical tools. And as you think about the interface with your customer, you really need to, in your prospects, you really need to be aware of your AI intelligent personality. So important.
All right,
yeah, John, I'm thinking essential, because this is something that people talk about, but there's no quantification or no research rigor. This introduces it. And I think it's super important when you are putting an LLM in the chatbot, in the customer interfaces, you need to be aware what the underlying emotional biases might be. So I just think it is an essential piece of information and research.
All right, we
So let me play devil's advocate here,
Okay.
because I had this sort of maybe not triple optional, but maybe double optional, because first of all, I could give a long diatribe about personality profiles and cognitive psychology, but beyond that, I've been pounding the table forever, right from the beginning, that I wish there was more research on this stuff. So I'm grateful for the research. I hope they do more of it. But the level it's at right now is not particularly fruitful for anybody doing any real work. These things are vague. They're subjective. They don't really help me make, I mean, okay, if, you know, they make these incredible abstraction leaps, not to ever pick on my friends at Harvard Business School, from, oh, it's more rule conformant to, therefore you should use it in healthcare and financial services that have compliance issues. Bullshit. Okay. You have to test it and quantify it before you can make any claim like that. So this is interesting. And it is important that we begin to understand these models and their behaviors better. But this is a tiny aspect of their behaviors. As they point out, it's constantly changing. This is the problem with personality profiles as well, is that humans are pretty good at changing their personality profile on the moment for the situation they're in. And we don't even understand these things and how to apply such models to them. And they're being physically changed all the time. So I'm grateful for the research. I hope it continues. I don't find any use for this day to day for somebody trying to make decisions.
I think it's awareness, what we're talking about. And actually, this type of articles that introduce a new level of research into something are usually between super optional and essential. So it's actually to the power of the chalk over there to figure this out, because I really do think it's worth flagging that this is happening, and it's worth to be aware. There will be more research, but this is what we've seen, the first one. So I'm still on essential.
All right, looking at essential. I'm gonna split the baby here. Sorry to do a King Solomon. All right, we're gonna go for important.
Okay.
All right, Tim, you persuaded me a lot. I was leaning toward essential, but you know the dynamics, even the conversation we had at the beginning of the hour before he came on air, where Adam was talking about the kind of screwy behavior of one of his interactions with the 4.0 model from GPT and from chat from OpenAI. Anyway, I like this. Yeah, the temporal model. Vivek says, over time, lots of interaction dynamics. Next, Ankaj.
The next one comes from Google Research. It talks about how AMIE has gained vision, which is a research AI agent for multimodal diagnostic dialogue.
Yeah, kind of cool. You can add new stuff in. There's a lovely little self-diagnosis dialogue if you go down a little farther, Ankaj, in this thing. What'd you think, Luda?
I rated this as optional, but it is very interesting research. So it was published in Nature. They introduced this Amy tool some time ago, I think in 24, the first version of it, and it was just text-based. It didn't have multimodal thing, and it's called Amy, right? Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer.
Yep.
Right, and so now they introduced the capability of the user to share a skin condition or what have you, a photo or a video, right? And it's taken into account as the system thinks about it. So it's state-aware reasoning that they're introducing here, which is super cool. And then they have a simulator with 100+ patients, simulated patients that they they work through. And if you scroll down, Ankaj, the results are pretty stunning, right? That the model outperformed PCPs in pretty much all the cases. Go, it's sort of at the end, I think. Here, see, the red one is the model. So it is great. I think great research. It's certainly pushing the boundary, but I think it's optional.
Wow.
Yeah.
That certainly doesn't sound like an
Go ahead.
optional.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Completely get better than doctors. But Paul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know what they would do it with it now, and it has limitations because it is it is still text-based, right? So the introduction, it's still texting the model, so it's not quite there as a usable tool. That's why optional.
Paul,
Optional.
Adam.
Yeah, optional. The one thing I thought that was interesting is that it can actually ask for images when it needs it.
Yeah.
So that sort of, I was just thinking, sort of expanding on that into diagnostics in other ways. I mean, your car is broken down, or there's smoke coming out of the hood, and you go to the LLM and you say, hey, what's going on? It says, can you go back to the tailpipe and take a picture of that? Okay, now pop the hood and go over by the battery and take a picture of that. And so where the large language model is actually driving a little more of that instruction is a very powerful concept, but I don't think enough to tip this over into the important category.
Interesting. Luda's argument for optional actually pushed me toward importance. I think I'm going to rate this thing important.
Here we go.
I had this as important. I think this is essential for healthcare people.
Yeah.
This is it. This is the second article, by the way, that I can recall, and I think there are probably 3 or 4 that is not only that is cited better empathy, which people underestimate the value of in healthcare. So for healthcare, this is really important. Also, this is the umpteenth article with this kind of graph that says, by the way, hallucinations are very rare and on the same level as human error. So if we just call it error instead of hallucination, the error rate is comparable to human error rate. And the general differential diagnosis, which is the holy grail in healthcare, is consistently and monotonically, as we say, mathematically superior. So that's important in healthcare. I think the reason I gave it an important overall is because it shows these multimodal models are starting to become much more capable, and the error rate, I think, is one of those things that has dramatically improved even over the last 3 or 4 months, and nobody's noticing. Like, people aren't talking about hallucinations, whatever you want to call them, the error rates anymore, because they're now consistently in the 99 plus percentile accuracy range. So they're comparable to human error.
Yep.
And they're performing better.
We're going to go important on this bad boy. Important it is. Last one, Ankaj.
The last one comes from OpenAI, how it has reached an agreement to buy startup Windsurf for $3 billion.
All right, as the great Sam Urban said, Senator Sam Urban said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Before you know it, really adds up. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, actually, it was the guy from Wisconsin. It wasn't Sam Urban, whose name I can't remember. But anyway, I think this is, I guess you could say you could make the argument for important because it's a major vendor making a significant acquisition. Effectively, you could say admitting they're behind in the coding space because they bought a coding company. So in that sense, you could make the argument for important, but it's an acquisition. And just as a public service announcement, since I've been through these kind of markets as both a funder and a fundraiser, you have to remember it's a $3 billion acquisition, but that's all funny money. It's I'm sure primarily OpenAI stock, and OpenAI stock is valued by what we call the put your finger in the air method right now. So if OpenAI goes public, it becomes real money, or liquidates in some fashion, it becomes real money. Or if they gave them cash, that's a different story. But a lot of these deals, when you're in these really heated markets with enormous valuations, are stock deals. And we used to do this all the time because your stock is currency. and it gives you enormous leverage to acquire competitors and various piece parts at incredibly what effectively are subsidized prices.
And Tim, to that point, I think I just saw they just announced that OpenAI is moved away from going for profit status here. So how this actually gets to an IPO is really unclear, and you're just betting on the secondary.
Yeah, they can still IPO the for-profit part. Yeah, that was also interesting, and I'm sure there's much more to the story to that than we realize. But yeah, that was interesting too. But the point is, right now you have no idea the real value in terms of dollars of this acquisition.
All righty. So we're looking at, as Ashish mentions, it's Cursor AI GitHub competitor Microsoft really cementing in the development community.
Yep, and they've been losing in that area. It makes sense for OpenAI because they've been getting behind in that area.
But the other thing, I know we're wrapping up here, but this is just to remind our listeners, this is the inside bullseye, inside the bullseye, inside bullseye of adoption here. And we're seeing that even with $3 billion funding money number.
Yeah.
Adam,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, probably on the fence as well. Exactly as Tim said, it's an acquisition announcement. It won't have any material impact really day to day on any of the decision making from our leaders. So I'd probably lean towards optional just to separate the chaff from the wheat.
Yeah, I'm optional as well. This is not quite. It's a
big move.
It's a big move. It's an indicative move, a strategic move, but we don't know what's going to happen. So
all right, so we're going to go for optional on this one. All right, Ankash, will you give us a tote board? Paul, any announcements?
No, I actually thought we'd cover this article because he's the CEO of Windsurf spoke at that MIT conference last week, and it was announced the next day. I think the only announcement I have is we had a really good learning lab last night talking about different ChatGPT prompts and use cases here, and that'll get promoted. But I do think, Tim, what's interesting on that, I really like your error rate term because I think people don't talk about hallucinations, and O3 in particular seems to be really good in that area. But no major announcements.
All right, no major announcements. Luda, Adam, Tim, Ankash, anything else? All right, remember everybody, like the channel. Join us tomorrow morning if you're interested. Sign up for our newsletter. You can always find the articles at gaiinsights.com/articles. All right, thanks, and have a great AI day. Bye-bye.